welcome everybody to this really exciting event. Me and Gemma really wanted to put on an event that showcased some of the obstacles that parents experience. It's something that is relatively overlooked, we feel, in many companies, but is obviously incredibly important because a hell of a lot of the people that are employed in the UK right now are parents or are trying to become parents. And so that's why I've surrounded myself with these brilliant specialists here who I'm going to intro in a second. But first, I have to introduce myself, which I always forget to do. My name is Jamie. I'm the founder of a company called ReechUs, and ReechUs at the very core is a mental health support service. So we looked at what's out there, what companies are using in order to provide their employees with some sort of mental health support. We felt that it wasn't good enough. And so we came up with something which we believe is better. And that expanded into something that's really, really cool. To my left, she may not be to my left on your screen, we have Lucy Wilson. Lucy, would you mind giving everyone a very quick intro into who you are and what you
Yeah,
do?
very quick intro. So my name's Lucy Wilson. I'm the founder of Shine Strong Revolution and Maya, which is a maternal empowerment program for new mothers. And I'm a mum myself. And this all started because I had initially a son with a bowel condition. He had 3 operations in his first year. Then I also have another son who is autistic, non-verbal, with a global development delay. And I've been through the ringer with motherhood, and it's just made me incredibly passionate about helping educate other mothers to try and be able to look after themselves and navigate all the madness that is parenting.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Lauren-Faye Millingham, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Lauren. I'm founder of Sanctuary Tribe, which is a coaching and HR consultancy, and I focus on supporting new parents back into the workplace and also working very closely with businesses to set up really inclusive, family-friendly policies. Previous to that, I was a people director working as a people leader for the last 10 years. So for businesses like Soho House and Face Gym, so very much in sort of the wellness hospitality space, which generally tends to not be as sort of forward thinking in terms of their family friendly policies. So, and I started Sanctuary Tribe because after I had my little girl, I actually found it difficult to go back into my role as a full-time people director. The flexibility and support just wasn't there. So decided to take the leap and start my own thing and help support parents in the way that, is so needed within businesses.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And Lauren is also now one of the coaches on the ReechUs platform as well. So thank you very much for coming. And to my bottom left, I have the fabulous Katie Rollins. Katie, would you be able to give us a quick intro into who you are and how you help?
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. I am the CEO and founder of a new UK fertility charity called Fertility Action. I'm also the co-founder of Fertility Access UK, which is a Parliament campaign group where we are working towards equal access to IVF and fertility treatments within the UK and the UK government. And apart from that as well, I run a children's farm park. So I know all elements from the fertility side to thousands of children running around in a farm park. So yeah, I'm busy.
Very busy. And also, I used to go to that farm park when I was a kid. So amazing to have you. Thank you guys so much for joining me. We had a little planning session before we started this event 2 days ago, 2 or 3 days ago. And the scope of the subject is so broad, right? What we wanted to essentially do is highlight some of the obstacles that parents or people who are trying to become parents are facing, and then provide some insights as to what employers could do to help support them or support the environment to make it more conducive to the things they're experiencing. And so we looked at the journey that a parent could go through. And I guess the most obvious place to start is with fertility, because there's many people out there that are trying to get pregnant, and there's a lot of obstacles and there's a lot of mental exhaustion that goes alongside some of those obstacles. And so, Katie, I'd like to kind of kick things off with you, if possible. And if you could you kind of give us a very broad look at some of the fertility paths so that people can kind of understand what we're talking about here?
Sure. So I think normally when we're discussing fertility, people's natural thoughts are towards IVF and probably towards females. So it's often looked at as the fault to be lying with the female body, and often people associate it as a female condition, but actually it's a 50-50 split, male and female usually with infertility, and it's a 33-33-33 split when it comes to unexplained infertility as well. It can sometimes be a double contribution there. People often don't see that the male factor is actually something that needs testing at early stages. So particularly at GP primary care level, men should really be having quite a lot of testing before they're referred to clinics. Sadly, that's not really happening in the UK. I think it's important to understand as well that there's a huge emotional toll that goes through a fertility journey. And so your employees or colleagues and even employers in your organizations will be going through something or know someone that's gone through it. It's 1 in 6 people in the UK and 1 in 7 couples in our country at the moment that are navigating a fertility battle, and often because of the shame and the stigma associated, people won't willingly discuss that. So instead of it just being, okay, we're a couple, let's say we're a heterosexual couple, we're infertile, let's go for IVF. It's not that simple. It might be that they get referred and they have IVF, of course, but there's also things like ICSI and IUI and PICSI and various other, which are all very invasive treatments that people can go through. But we've also got to look at the journeys for same-sex couples. Now, same-sex couples don't have equality in funding currently on the NHS. So for them, it's a huge financial implication for them to go through for the fertility treatment process. When it comes to surrogacy, there is a lot of stigma attached to that. You've probably seen with the Lily, I can't remember her name, who was in the press recently, who's just had a baby through surrogacy, and she had some Lily Collins. She had some terrible backlash, purely through people's lack of understanding. I think people think it's if you got loads of money, you just pay someone to have a baby thing, and actually quite more often than not, that's not the case at all. It's because maybe their bodies can't do it, or there is a biological issue there. So I think the paths to parenthood look really different. And I think the other thing to really be aware of is quite often these paths through infertility result in someone never having a child and being childless not by choice. And I think there will be people within your organizations that may be childless by choice or child-free, or however they like to describe it. And people are very particular about how they like you to explain that or the terminology you use. But I think it's really important to understand that just because somebody doesn't have children doesn't mean they didn't want to have children. And simple questions like asking, have you got kids, can be really painful for someone that have been through a fertility journey. We quite often have throwaway comments as well about how we have conceived. One of the most painful things in our support groups that people talk about is hearing someone across the office saying, you know, they'd gone away to Ibiza and first time, boom, and they were pregnant. Now, for someone going through infertility, that's extremely painful to hear that sort of thing. And, you know, even complaining as a parent about how difficult your children are publicly, that can be really difficult. So, yeah, the journeys are very diverse. There's a lot of donor conception now as well, and that can be more costly than IVF. There's even tax on sperm. Would you believe that? So, yeah. A lot of emotional implications and a hell of a lot for people to process. And I think just knowing that within your organizations could make your company culture a lot more of a positive experience for people.
Is there anything in particular that you would suggest to an employer? Because what you've just explained there has probably blown a few people's minds, because when you first started to talk to me about it, I was blown away by the scope of this subject. What would you suggest for an employer? Where would we start as an employer in order to make our workplace more friendly towards some of the issues that you're talking about?
I think in the first instance, understand that there will be things that your employees might be going through that they absolutely don't want to discuss with you, and to respect that. But also, if they're asking for leave, sometimes, particularly for fertility treatments, I've heard of a woman actually only a month ago who was told she had to be in work on a specific day. There was no negotiation. Now, that day was her trigger shot day, which for people that haven't been through IVF, what that means is you inject a hormone which releases all of your eggs in your body to enable you to get your eggs collected. if you've had a trigger shot, you cannot change that appointment. Your eggs have been released. They have to be collected by the consultant and the embryologist in order to perform the IVF. So she didn't have a choice. And they said to her, if she wasn't in work that day, she would have to go through a disciplinary procedure. She actually never went through that because she never went back to her job. But what I'm saying is, had that company have just been a little bit more flexible, a little bit more understanding, and respected her privacy and what she needed there, they could have retained her. And actually, she's a very, very intelligent woman, and she will have been a massive loss to the organisation. And I think from a retention point of view, it's really important. But also, the financial implications is always a bit icky, I think, at work when we discuss money. It can be uncomfortable for employers and employees. But I think it's really important to understand the financial pressure. Like, one round of private IVF now is around £13,000 because you don't just pay for the treatment, you're paying for the medication, you're paying for, sometimes you lose out on money through time off work, or your travel because there's not that many clinics. If you don't live near London or any of the bigger cities, that can be quite expensive to get to your appointments. So, and then again, same-sex couples, you have to fund 6 rounds before you get any NHS funding. That's a hell of a lot of money. So I think understanding that your employee may not be able to afford things if you're on a social gathering that they might have to self-fund sometimes, or maybe if they're asking for a pay rise and you think it might feel a bit cheeky, there may be some reasons behind that. Or maybe with some companies now, they do programs where they pay, like with your health insurance, they offer a benefit to employees with a fertility. Now, it's really likely that many of the employees won't take this up, but for the ones that do, you're essentially giving your employee potentially the chance to have a child. That is retention level off the scale. They're always going to want to work for your brand once you have done that. So I feel with the companies that we've spoken to that have done this, their staff love them. They want to stay there forever, and quite rightly. So if you're a company that could afford to do that on your health benefit scheme, then absolutely do it, because it's the best gift you can give your team ever.
We talked a little bit, thinking that that's an amazing offer, right? And you can see how much loyalty and that level of support would foster. Is there something on a smaller scale that organizations can do? We talked a little bit about lunch and learns, some sort of education and awareness. What talk us through those kind of initiatives?
I think, yeah, on a smaller scale, things like having an area that isn't a toilet for people to do their injections that's private is a simple and it's a nice gesture from an organisation to do. I think, like you said, the lunch and learns, they're so easy, aren't they? You can speak to our charity, or you can speak to Fertility Matters at Work, do it, where you could, potentially do a charitable donation, which is already helping the cause. And we come in and speak to your organisation about the things to consider surrounding fertility treatments for your employees. But I think there's a lot of really minor things. Like, we were discussing this in our preliminary meeting, that sometimes you might have a male in the organisation that sat near a radiator. Now, heat is really detrimental to sperm production. So he might be asking to move his desk, but he might not want to explain that. So simple things like understanding that, although that might seem like they're being difficult to you, actually just moving his chair to another desk might be very helpful for that employee.
So from looking at this is kind of education on a management level, in being able to, if a manager understands that someone is going through fertility treatment, are going to be more aware of these types of things, I guess.
Yeah. I think so. I think as well that generally giving people the gift of knowledge and education, you want your employees to be educated. You want them to understand, maybe if they're in their early stages of a fertility journey, or they're in their 20s, if you're employing lots of people in their early 20s, imagine being able to tell them that there's a condition called a varicocele, which is a lump on a testicle. Now, 41%, I think it is, of men who have got a negative subfertility diagnosis are found to have had a varicocele. A varicocele is basically a swollen vein within the testicle, which sometimes, with a removal operation, can make you naturally fertile. If they know that, and they know about things like DNA fragmentation in sperm, which again, it's a simple bit of training, they're then empowered with their toolkit to know about their fertility before they even enter onto this journey, which could save not just the money involvement, but also the emotional toll of, let's say in a heterosexual couple, they end up with a partnership, they get pregnant, they miscarry again. It's an awful thing for people to have to go through with on a mental level. And again, the research is now showing that through DNA fragmentation testing of sperm, that's potentially a preventable situation. So I do think that education is really key here surrounding fertility as a subject.
I think underscoring all of this is going to be education, communication, those two big things. I think are going to pop up quite a lot. I want to move on a little bit and talk a little bit about maternity and paternity, that kind of period there. So Lauren, I'm looking at you. Yeah. We're going to be. What I'd like to kind of break down a little bit is some of the experiences that are potentially negative for someone going through that period. And as soon as we can start to break down some of the things they would experience, maybe we can look at some of the things the employer can do to try and help them with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, talking about some of the negative experiences, a lot of the time it comes from, as Katie was saying, sort of a lack of awareness from managers really, and that educational piece. So, a lot of the times when an employee tells their manager that they're pregnant, there can obviously sometimes be that sort of eye roll, or, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to cover this position? They're going to be off sick loads and all of these things. It's just an assumption on the manager's part that, might come from them just not being aware of, the support that's available. So I think open communication is the first thing that's just really, really important. And I think as you go through your sort of pregnancy and you're ready to go on maternity leave, there can often be a lack of communication around how are you feeling? Is there any support that you need? But also, like, how do you want to be communicated with when you're off on leave? There is such an assumption from businesses that once you have your baby, that is it. For a year, you are just ghosted. You don't want to speak to anybody. You just want to be at home just with your baby, which a lot of the time couldn't be further from the truth. You're at home all day with a tiny child. Sometimes you just want to speak to another adult. So actually, like, check-ins with work every now and again is actually really nice, and being invited to socials and things still, but that actually doesn't happen very frequently. And I get feedback from that a lot, where mums weren't invited to the Christmas party, or haven't been updated on a big restructure that happened at work that affects their team. And there's those things as well that happen quite frequently. That can have quite a negative effect, and also then that builds up communication-wise when they're due to come back to work. If there's not been kind of effective communication in the run-up, and that's when employees know what support is available, there's a lot of anxiety around, oh my God, I've spent, it could be up to a year of looking after a baby, not really having, not having those sort of conversations in meetings that are, or having to send like countless emails. You're out of practice. So having that anxiety about going back to work, am I still going to be good at my job? Am I still relevant? All of these feelings are, they're really strong. And having that conversation with your manager in the run-up, and having those, utilising your kit days as well, so that you know what to expect and you feel comfortable, is so valuable.
Is that if anyone, by the way, has had an experience very similar, or something that is being said is triggering an experience, a memory of an experience you've had, please share. Gemma's contributed to the chat and said it can feel very isolating when you're on maternity leave. What is it that an employer, do you think, could do to help? I mean, you've highlighted a few of the things there, like not being invited to some social occasions. There is probably a relatively negative narrative that's already built into maternity leave. So what kind of give us some insights into what an employer or a manager could do to make the journey a little bit easier?
Yeah, of course. I think the first thing comes down to education. I think educating your managers on what support that they can offer, because nobody wants to you don't know what you don't know, right? So I think that having that education around what support is available to your employees when they tell you that they're pregnant, and also having education around the challenges that you go through throughout pregnancy, after you have a baby, and the challenges when you return to work, having that knowledge is really powerful. And then it's absolutely encouraging open communication, because every parent is different. They have different pregnancies, they have different maternity leaves, and they have a different experience coming back to work. So having that real open dialogue and ensuring psychological safety is really important, that your employee feels that they can come to you and let you know what they're struggling with, and that support is going to be there, and there's not going to be this view of, oh, you know, she's just a mum who's complaining about becoming a parent and just isn't going to work very hard. Their priorities are elsewhere, and because there's a lot of negative association, I suppose, that when you become a mum, that's your focus. Your sole focus is on a mum, and you don't really care about your career anymore. And that's just not the case for so many people. So I think engaging in those conversations of how do you want to be communicated with when you're off? What would you like to be kept in the loop about, and how would you like your return to work to look? How do you want to use your kit days, and manage that conversation together, and be open that things might change. You know, you might have kit days set in a certain way and they might need to change, and just be open to that. And then just asking what kind of, you know, how are you feeling? How are you getting on now that you've come back to work? You know, what are the challenges that you're facing? How can we help support you? Because, as I say, that's going to be different for everybody. So it's that sort of conversational piece, which is really key.
Can I ask you all a question? And feel free.
Jamie,
oh, yes,
sorry.
please, Gemma.
Can I just jump in with a bit of experience from my side? I have 2 children. They are not babies anymore. They're 13 and 11. But I've been through a lot of what you're talking about, Lauren-Faye. I think what's really important for employers, just based on my experience, is just to not stick to the plan. So when I went off, I was like, I'm going to be off for 6 months and I'm going to come back to work, and that's how my life's going to work. My first birth was so traumatic that I couldn't come back straight away. And having that conversation with my manager and my employer was so difficult, because they were like, well, you said you're going to be off 6 months. So we only got someone in to cover your role for 6 months. And it makes that really uncomfortable. So just understanding that, you know, you might have to have an emergency cesarean, or, you know, stillbirth, or anything awful could happen during that time. So I think having that understanding and that compassion, that just because we've agreed something before I've left, it doesn't mean it's going to be like that after I've had the baby.
Yeah, absolutely, Jo. And that's such a good point. And I think having that meeting before you go on maternity leave with your employees, to let them know what their rights are and because you're right, it is flexible. Just because you say you're going to take 6 months, I have actually, when I was in my role in HR, if somebody said to me 6 months, I was like, okay, because in my mind, so many people, you know, think that that's the time, and actually when they've become a parent, they're like, actually I want longer off. Or there's lots of people actually that say I want a year, and after 6 months are like, I need to come back to work earlier, I can't have a year off, you know, I just need to get back into some sort of rhythm. So yeah, and I think just letting them know what they can ask for and what they are able to change is super important.
I think there's a really delicate thing here actually as well to bring in, that for people that have announced that they're pregnant, to not assume that that pregnancy is going to equal a live birth, because I think the assumption of employers is often that that is the case, and actually they haven't put the systems in place before the employee has gone on to maternity leave, so that the employee doesn't understand what happens in the case of a loss. So I think as part of your policies for maternity and paternity leave, understanding how that will have ramifications on the mental health of not just the mother, but also the potential father or other partner within the equation is really important. And I think that is particularly important in same-sex couples, because they already feel excluded, the other parent, often from an organizational point of view. And I think that that's really, for me, a really relevant point to highlight there.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think just on that point with, there's also the part around sort of morning sickness, and that first 3 months when you don't want to, you know, a lot of people don't want to tell their employer that they're pregnant in the first 3 months, because that's kind of classed as like the danger zone. but so many people experience really awful symptoms throughout their pregnancy in those first 3 months. So again, around that educational piece, it's just managers being aware of, you know, not necessarily asking the question, but just be conscious if someone is looking a bit unwell or they're asking for some time off, just have that knowledge that might be what's going on for them, and just being supportive, because you're going to find out either way at some point, you know, when they're ready to tell you. But, you know, it's about respecting that sort of first moment when you don't really want to say anything, but you could be feeling super sick and just not able to show up to work like you normally would.
The themes of communication and support are coming up a lot throughout this. So I think that I'm going to kind of come back to that and try and summarize it at the end. Lucinda, you run a group called Happy Mums, I am assuming, based on your chat message and what I can see right now. You said that
Yes.
there are lovely to meet you, by the way.
Yes, Angie,
you
thank
said
you.
that there's some mums in your group that are already worrying at just 3 months, when their baby's just 3 months old, about coming back to work.
Yeah, I mean, our organisation is about supporting mums with maternal mental health. So, I mean, worry is general. But they're already starting to talk about, oh, I don't know about when I want to go back to work. I don't know. They're already kind of thinking, especially with organisations that have that kind of maternity handcuff, that thing of you have to work a certain period of time to be able to not have to pay back a part of your maternity leave. And that, while I think that's designed as a retention scheme, it actually puts more people off than anything, from what we've found, is because they feel like they've lost control. It's that, like with mental health, control is such a big thing. And when you are being forced into a situation where you have to work a certain amount of time, otherwise you'll have to pay back money that you don't have, because having a baby is very expensive. And they're trying to balance their mental health with these kind of terms and conditions that have been placed on them, which is really difficult. And then if they ask for reduced hours from what they were on previous, they'll have to work twice the amount of time to be able to recoup, to be able to not have to pay that back. So there's a lot of difficulties that people worry about, and they worry about how they're going to be treated. They worry about if they're not, like, the baby's still not sleeping, how are they going to be able to function in their job, depending on what it is that they do. There's all sorts of worries and things in there. And I mean, some people are already thinking about, well, I might change job, or I might not go back to work. But a lot of them really want to have their careers as their piece of their identity, and are slightly heartbroken when they can't do that in their existing organisation, because that communication isn't there. And I think a lot of employers forget that or miss that. They automatically seem to assume that, oh, now they're pregnant, they might not come back. But actually, some of them really do want to go back, and they really do want to work, but they just need a little bit more support with it. And I think it's sad to see it. It's a real struggle. And then obviously you've got the whole childcare thing, which I'm sure someone will come on to at some point. So I won't overtake your talk.
I'd love to. Thank you so much, Lucinda. Thank you for sharing that, and for coming onto the event. I really appreciate it. I'll send a connection request afterwards. We can have a little chat. Lucy, I'd love to kind of move into returning to work mode, new mother, new father mode, and some of the challenges that are going to be that someone's going to face when they do eventually come back to work, but they have a child now. We can start as, you know, a 9-month-old or a year-old, or we can kind of talk about having a child in teenage years, where you know, kind of give us
goodness.
some of the problems that you've experienced, or some of the things that you've noticed.
Well, I have to say, because I never actually went back to work because of the circumstances of what happened. I ended up taking redundancy because my first son was born with a bowel condition, and it had been so traumatic. I mean, I had planned to go back to work. I had a really good maternity leave, and I'd even booked into nursery. I had everything planned, but then you never know. And that's one of the things I think with children, you just never know. You can do all the planning, ready for them to come, but you never know what's actually going to happen. So in the end, I ended up having to take redundancy, which I felt glad that I could take redundancy. But I think for a lot of people, and Lucinda just mentioned it there, sleep is a massive issue, because because you go back to work, children don't suddenly start sleeping, you know? And so you can be going to work and you can be quite dangerous if you're having to drive and you've had barely any sleep, and then you're having to try and function, and you've got all the pressure of trying to go back. And the things, I think you're quite torn, because you want to go back, because like Lauren said, it's like part of your identity. And I think that so many women do want that, because you don't, and I don't want to say just a mum, it's not being just a mum, being a mum is amazing and it's an absolute privilege, but there are a lot of things that come with being a mum that aren't necessarily things that you want to be doing all the time, like loads of housework and things that you're stuck in, and you're not seeing people. So I think it can be really difficult to get the balance of coming back, but then not, you're sort of, from what I've heard from other people, is that you're a bit torn, because half of you is always in another place, and then the fear of leaving your children somewhere different. A lot of people I know, a lot of my friends really struggled with that, going back to work and leaving their child with nursery. And then for a long time, some children might be all right, but then other children are going to be crying a lot of time, and that puts so much pressure on the parents who are leaving them there, or then going to collect them at the end of the day when they're upset, and then having to juggle, is your employer going to be okay about you working different hours? And I was guilty of it. I can remember people just working part-time, and you'd be in the office all day and you think, oh, they're going now. But you have to foster a culture where that's acceptable and that's normal, because those people are still bringing everything they've got to their roles, just because they're doing it at part-time. So it's a lot about culture and making sure that everybody realizes, and that you're open to it, I think. And as it gets older, obviously. Yeah, sorry.
Lucinda's added, and in the early days at nursery, the number of illnesses that they catch.
Oh my God. Absolutely.
Anyone want to share some experiences there? Lauren?
I mean, my little girl is sick. Not sick. She's just constantly snotty, got a cough. You know, she had chicken pox a few weeks ago. So she was totally fine with it. She was very spotty, but wasn't under the weather. But I had her at home with me for the week. Lucky that I have the flexibility to do that. And by the end of the week, she looked great. Her skin was great. She didn't have a snotty nose. And I sent her back to nursery on the Monday, and she was just had a runny nose again by the Wednesday. It's just crazy.
I think as well, the level of stress as a parent, and not just a mum, as a dad sometimes as well, when you're having to balance this, I think people don't realise until you've become a parent what that is. I genuinely remember a moment during the early days when I had 3 children under 3. My IVF worked, by the way. I had twins and then I had a third. But after a long journey. And I remember all 3 babies, I had a sick bug had gone through the house, and I had one on the sink, one who I had a baby wipe in my toes, and I was trying to wipe them with my foot while I balanced the other one in the sink, and the other one was being sick in the shower at the same time. And I was literally, I didn't have enough limbs to balance the sick and poorly children. And I remember thinking, how do people do this well? How do I do this? There wasn't an end in sight, and we survived and it was fine, but the level of stress is just off the scale. Just wanted to put that one in there for you.
Yeah, thank you for that image.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Is there anything that employers offer in terms of education, or could offer in terms of education? Lucy, you want to jump in on that?
Yes, so I'm very into education, because I think that so much of what we go through, I mean, from pregnancy, you're learning so much about how to look after the baby, or hopefully to be able to look after the baby, because they're all different. But what I think is missed out a lot is basically about how much women are going to change, how much you're going to go through a change yourself. So we know that mentally and physically, you go through something that's called matrescence, and the changes that you go through are just as profound as becoming a teenager. But when you become a teenager, there's a whole culture around being a teenager, and everybody's sort of like, you're like ready for you to become a teenager, and there's loads of support in place. But we don't have the same thing for when people become parents, and it's matrescence for women, and there's so many changes that have been found. But also there's patrescence for men as well, and so men are going through changes like this as well. And I think that one of the things with knowledge, if you can understand and be prepared for these things, then when it does hit, it's not so overwhelming, and you're not, because it's incredibly difficult trying to look after a new baby. But if you're then also thinking, why the hell am I feeling like my whole world has been tipped upside down and I'm struggling so much, then that adds on another layer of stress and anxiety. But if we can teach people about what they're going to go through, what to expect, and how to be able to put in place in advance of having your baby, ways of being able to look after yourself, like a well-being plan and things that you can do techniques that you can learn, like mindfulness and breath work and stuff, to be able to like calm your nervous system when things are really difficult, because at some point they will be really difficult. But the more I think we can just invest in education, and that's what employers can do, is invest in education for both of the parents, and that's going to give them not an easier, I don't want to say easier ride because it's always really difficult, but it's going to equip them with the tools that they need. And if I can say that, if we can also educate the managers and employers and the team and everybody about these changes and everything that people can be going through, then it just help everybody, really, I think. So it's education.
Katie, Lauren, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, actually, something just popped into my mind as you were talking, Lucy, and then sod's law, it's gone now, which is really annoying. But yeah, it was around that sort of education piece. Oh, that was it. I think it's actually really valuable as well to encourage mums within the business to sort of share experiences. So, sometimes, businesses have varying different budgets, right? So businesses might not have a huge budget to invest in external training, and actually something that can be really valuable is sharing experiences. So doing a lunch and learn with not one mum, but a group of mums that can talk about their experience and how they differ, because I think that gives a level of comfort to people as well, to know that they're not on their own and that everybody goes through something slightly different. And then they might identify one mum that has gone through something that's particularly sort of similar to what you're going through that you can talk to.
Yeah, maybe set up like a buddying system so that when people come back, got somebody who's already been there and done it, and they can like go to them when they're feeling bad and they can just like help them a bit. Yeah, that's really good.
I think a simple link as well when you're doing your company comms, just including a few wellness links to actually accredited providers of things. Like we have a fertility support group and we have partner organizations that do specifically focused sessions for certain things within fertility. So you might want to have a male focused group, for example, for the men in the organization that might not want to say I've got a low sperm count in the middle of all of their other colleagues, but actually they might want to quietly have a reference point and know where to go to have somewhere safe to speak about it. So if your organization can't provide that space or it doesn't set up like that, being a good signposter to great and accredited, well-researched organizations that are actually going to be able to support them sufficiently and confidentially, with them being able to trust you that is going to be a confidential move.
Well, fortunately, we are sponsored by Happy Mums, this event. I'm joking. But there's a good example of a support group, right? That might not necessarily be internal, it could be external. Lucinda, you want to jump in?
I was literally just writing that in the chat. I was like, if anyone wants to set up those links, we run online peer support groups for mums who might need help. We run them in person as well, but at the moment they're only in Cumbria, so it might not help everybody. But yeah, I mean, we've been in talks with companies who have been keen to try and set up peer support groups within their own organisations, but the uptake hasn't quite been there because the barrier to admitting in your workplace that you might be worried about your mental health isn't quite there yet. But they do kind of point people in the direction of our groups that are in the community instead. And we have because a lot of ours are kind of during the day, we have online evening groups for mums that have gone back to work who still need that support, because it doesn't go away. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, as an organisation, when we first set up, we were designed to set up from pregnancy to 2, to the child is 2, that kind of 1001 days thing that's often talked about. But actually, we've taken that away, and it's just wherever you are on your parenting journey, because those stresses and worries don't tend to change. I mean, it's just a different trigger. You're still going to have the mom guilt. You're still going to have the worry. You're still going to have everything else. And you still need that support from other mums that are in similar situations, especially like we're seeing a huge rise up here with parents whose kids just struggling to get back into school after COVID. And they're getting letters from the schools saying, we're going to send you to prison if you don't send your kid to school. And those kids are pretty much suicidal because they don't want to go to school. And there's this huge face-off, and there's no support for the parents in any of that. So there's a lot of things. Sorry, that jumped ahead a few years, but there's huge implications for things. And then if you're being, from a work point of view, to come back to what this is about, if you're being asked to constantly go into meetings at school, which is out of your work hours, how do you explain that to your line manager? And at what point do they start to go, seriously, another meeting? So there's a lot to consider throughout the whole journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that. There's one other subject that I wanted to touch on, Lucy, which
Yeah,
is
and
being
it led on a bit from what Lucinda just said as
It kind
well.
of did, yeah. It was a good little
Yeah,
segue, wasn't it?
Yeah, it does. So, having, well, one child who's neurodiverse and one child with a bowel condition, I think being a parent carer is something that can really, really impact you, especially at work. And I've been incredibly lucky that I then started working for myself. But if I had not been working for myself, then trying to get my son into school last year was one of the most difficult things that I've ever done. And the amount of paperwork, having to navigate a system which is just, you feel like it's set up for you to fail, and having to engage with so many different stakeholders is a massive job within itself. So if employers are employing parent carers, then they really need to be aware of the extra support that they need, because I think that I can't remember, I think maybe it's like 600 parent carers are leaving the workforce every day 600, and like that's a terrible number of people, of talent to be losing, and the amount of money that that's costing businesses, when if they could put in the right support, because I'm sure that those parent carers don't, I'm sure they need those jobs and they want those jobs for their own well-being as well. So it's a case of being aware and looking at what you can do to support parent carers at work. And there are lots of people starting to do work like that at the moment as well, offering that support out there. People who are carers themselves are now starting to offer workshops and things to show how you can do it.
That awareness, I mean, awareness is coming up a lot. Awareness, education, communication. Those three words I've heard in pretty much every event, regardless of what we're talking about. It comes up again and again and again. Are there any specific challenges, Lucy, that you could share about having a child who is neurodiverse? As someone who is neurodiverse, it's kind of interesting subject to talk about for me.
It can be very, very stressful. I think you have to put a lot of emphasis on your own well-being, so that you've got the ability to then to be able to cope when things are really stressful. It can also be a joy, because my son, although he can't talk, when he's happy, he's like the happiest little bundle of joy you've ever seen in your life. But then at the same time, they're really dark times, and then trying to balance those with having another child whose well-being is also affected by his well-being. It's just really, really difficult. But I would say that you have to grow. You grow into the role because you have to. And I think parents grow a resilience that, I mean, I've become more resilient than I would ever have dreamed possible. But you have to, and you learn a whole new world that you have to try and navigate. But there are a lot of lovely people along the way who are stage ahead of you and who will help you.
This is actually a really lovely point that we could kind of wrap up on, or at least lean towards the end of this discussion on, which is, what are the things that a parent gains from this process? We've talked a lot about the obstacles and the issues, but what are the things that a parent or new parent is taking into the workforce that they might not necessarily have had before? Anything that anyone would like to jump in? Gemma?
We are the best at multitasking and juggling a million things and
Katie made
spinning
that
a
clear.
million plates. That's our superpower, Jamie.
I think as well, having empathy and compassion on a different level for your colleagues. I think not just through fertility, but I think through parenting, you understand emotion and the power of emotion to a complete new level. And I think it just helps you to understand that when people go through trauma or anything to do with not just parenting, but close loved ones, your understanding just goes up a level. And I think there's a level of kindness there that maybe, I'm sure it was there before, but it brings out the best in people. I think those sorts of experiences, just being able to fully understand and relate.
Lauren, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
I mean, two amazing points. I'd say probably the only other thing is stress management in work. I think like for me anyway, when I've been faced with something quite stressful at work, I just feel like because your priorities do change. Like, that's a fact. You've got a tiny human that you're bringing up, and that So things that maybe would have felt like the end of the world previously, actually now I think you can put things into perspective a little bit more. And that, I think that's actually a really powerful thing, because it's not good. Like, stress makes you stupid. Like, it's, you know, your brain doesn't function in the best way. It's like, so I think you're naturally quite used anyway to dealing with like stressful situations when you have a child, when you've got lack of sleep. But I think when you've got those crisis situations at work, there is a level of calm that you can bring to them, because you know, it's not life or death if you know, a deadline gets missed or something. But I think it's just that being able to manage things in a, I don't know, in a more effective way, where you're not stressing yourself out so much over something that doesn't, on the big scale of things, doesn't need to be as stressful as it could be.
I've seen my sister with this. She's got 2 kids, and if shit hits the fan, if something goes wrong, she is the most calm person in the room. I'm a ball of energy. I'm all over the place, and she is just wonderful. She's also a pediatric nurse, so she goes through kind of crisis things on a daily basis. But she is, ever since she became a parent, she is amazing. Anything else? I love this particular topic is really exciting. You know, the positive things. Why should we want parents in the workplace? Anything we want to add?
I think it adds to your confidence as well. Makes you more confident, I think, because you especially when you've been through a lot of things and you've had to manage lots of stuff. I think it makes you just more confident in your capabilities and things that you can go out there and do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as well on that is the understanding communication better, because once you've spoken to a 3-year-old and they haven't heard you on the 7th time, it makes you understand that actually sometimes a conversation is two-way and that it needs to be tailored depending on the person. So it does help.
I love it. Just to kind of, I guess, finish up on the sort of the themes that we've been running through here of communication, awareness, and education. I think those are the 3 words that keep coming up. And I guess provide and support, I guess, is probably number 4. Providing an environment in which new parents or parents to be, or people trying to be parents, feel comfortable to be able to talk about the things that they're experiencing so that they can be supported. Is there anything that you would highlight as something that maybe you've seen or experienced that is definitely not the way to go, definitely not a good approach to take, maybe a mistake that a manager has made, or a way that they've communicated which isn't good? Some things that maybe you could highlight now so that it's something maybe we could avoid. Lucy?
Yeah, can I just say that when people say, oh yeah, you're going off on a break, and like maternity is going to be a holiday, I think that's like the worst thing you can say, because it's one of the most challenging periods of your life that you'll ever have.
Yeah.
Sounds
I think
so don't say that.
If someone tells you they're going through fertility treatment or having IVF, don't say, oh, how exciting. It's never exciting for someone about to go through IVF. And that is what everybody says, when that's like the number one thing people say. Oh, that's so exciting. You're going to have another chance. You're going to try a different thing. That's never the response.
Yeah. And I think I'd add to that with when somebody tells you that they're pregnant, is don't say to them, well, you know, you might not come back to work. You might not want to come back to work. I think that's a big thing that often is said to people when they tell you that they're pregnant. There's a presumption that you're just going to want to finish work afterwards and just be looking after your child full time. But actually, people, a lot of the time, mums can't wait to come back to work. So yeah, avoid making that assumption.
And assuming they're happy about the pregnancy too. I think that's often everybody says congratulations, and for some people it may not be the best outcome for them.
I guess assumptions.
That's very morbid of me, isn't it? Sorry, bit grumpy there.
No,
I think
it's a good point.
It's true.
I think general assumptions is probably not the best way to approach this subject, because it can be particularly sensitive for people that are going through a rough time. Is there anything else that we'd like to add? Because there's going to be employers and managers watching this, maybe not here today, but even in the future when we push this back out as a record. Is there anything that they should avoid? Maybe not in what they say, but in the way they act, in the way that they approach the situation. Something that we can kind of highlight as, look, try not to do that. It doesn't help.
Can I think jump in and your talk? Yeah. Sorry. Can I jump in?
Lucinda.
And then I'll shut up. always, if as a bit of advice, always ask people how they are twice to find out how they're really doing in any of the situations. So always just ask them, but how are you actually feeling? And otherwise another one, restless, I can't remember what it was. Don't dismiss their fears. So when they say something like, oh, I'm feeling a bit down today, don't dismiss that as, oh, it's just that, everyone always goes to, oh, it's just the baby blues, you'll be fine. If someone has any worries or any concerns, listen to them, say that you hear them, don't dismiss them. Don't just say, oh, you'll get over it, or that's just a phase, or any of those things. Whatever you do, do not dismiss people's concerns.
Thank you, Lucinda. Lauren.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from a business point of view, don't treat it like a tick box exercise. So I think don't just put training sessions in place without actually having a foundational culture where you are supportive and there is that communication and education that kind of runs through what the business stands for, because a lot of the time businesses will put on, get one person to come in and do a talk and then think that sort of fixes the situation and, oh, we're fantastic because we've put on this training session once a year. That's not going to do it. Actually, that's probably a nice to have. It's the sort of foundational bits that every single person in the business needs to do to make people feel comfortable and supported, so that when they do need help or they just want to talk to someone about what they're going through, that's there. It's a given that support is available.
If anyone wants to share an experience they've had or ask a question to Lucy, Lauren, or Katie, please feel free to do it in the next couple of minutes. The themes, I'm going to come back to the themes because I think the themes are important and they cross pretty much every subject we talk about, like I've said, whether it's redundancy or neurodivergence or, in this case, parenthood. The themes that keep coming back are communication, support, creating a culture of support, making someone feel comfortable enough to be able to communicate. They all kind of cross over each other. And then that big one, education. I keep hearing this word pop up: education, education, education. People who are managing cannot be educated too much about these subjects. So much that I've learned just talking to you guys about these different subjects. As a non-parent, there's so much I didn't know. And when I eventually do have a very big team, I'm going to want to know about all of this stuff so that when I hear they are going through something, I'm better prepared to be able to go, they might be experiencing that. Make sure they don't sit next to the radiator, et cetera, So I think the education piece is really, really great. The communication piece as well. It crosses everything. Being able to be in an environment where your people feel comfortable talking to you, but also maybe giving them an opportunity. I think Katie brought this up in the preliminary talk. Giving them an opportunity to talk to someone they're comfortable with. That was your point, Katie, wasn't it, in the chat that we had before?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think particularly when it comes to your physical health, and obviously when we're talking about fertility, it's your genitalia mostly, which is never going to be comfortable to talk to with your employer about your body in that way. And I think giving someone the option of who they can speak to, rather than if it's that issue, you have to speak to that person from that department, really closes their options. And for some people as well, it's feeling validated, and certain people will have that talent at being able to make others feel validated, and some people won't have that ability. That doesn't mean they're bad at their job, but it probably means they're not the person for this job. So giving people the choice of who they can talk to when they're struggling is a really significant thing here, I think.
Thank you for that. So we can kind of sign off on this and then all say our goodbyes. Lucy, is there one thing that we've talked about in this entire event, this last hour, that has kind of struck out as views? One bit of advice for employers?
Oh, education, education, education. Sorry, I just keep saying it. For them, help educate your parents and become educated yourself so that you can offer the right support.
Lauren, is there one thing that struck out for you that you'd like to mention now?
Yeah, set a culture of open communication and encourage it.
And Katie, you want to finish us off?
I'd say treat everyone as an individual. Remember that they may have varying sexualities, cultures, backgrounds, and different needs. And I think if you treat everyone in your organization as an individual, respecting their level of communication, like Lauren says, I think you can then be the best you can be at supporting them.
Fabulous. Gemma, is there anything that you've learned from this event that you would like to share?
I've learnt loads, and I'm a mum, and I've learned so much, and it's shocked me of even things that I say as a mum, and I might actually be upsetting other people. So yeah, reality check for me. Thank you, ladies. I think one thing that I would say is really important is people use this phrase work-life balance, like work is one part of your life and everything else is separate, where actually they merge and they have an impact on each other and they all kind of intertwine with each other. So if I've had a bad night's sleep because one of mine's been up, I'm going to be a little bit different at work the next day, and vice versa. If I'm having a stressful day at work, it might, I could take that home, and there's no clear divide. So I think as an employer, just remembering, even if you're not a parent or don't want to be a parent, that that person at work does have other factors that will impact them as well.
Brilliant. Look, Lucy, Lauren, Katie, Gemma, Lucinda, thank you all so much for contributing. Pat, Carol, Carla, Jade, Natalie, Sylvie, Amy, Jennifer, and Hannah, who's left. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope that this was insightful. I hope that there's a few things that you can take away from this. Thank you very much. Yeah, stick what you think of the conversation in the comments. That would be great. We are going to send a recording out to everybody afterwards, so feel free to pass that on to other people within your organization if you'd like to. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. This was really great.